I've spent 15 years in the dark corners of the world, protecting people who didn't deserve to live. I thought I was numb to it all, but when I was hired to find the disowned son of the Thorne political dynasty, I didn't expect to find a man who had been stripped of everything but his dignity. Julian was supposed to be a spoiled runaway. Instead, I found a soul that had been abandoned by his family and left to the wolves. They sent me to secure the asset, but the second I saw the fear in his eyes, the mission changed. I'm not just his bodyguard anymore. I'm the only wall between him and the people who want him dead. Would you risk everything to protect a stranger who had nowhere else to turn? Let me know in the comments. The rain in the Bronx doesn't feel like the rain in Manhattan. In Manhattan, it's a romantic backdrop for a movie. Here, it's cold, gray, and smells like wet pavement and broken promises. I checked the GPS on my wrist one last time. Apartment 4B. The building was a pre-war relic that should have been condemned a decade ago. It was exactly the kind of place you go when you don't want to be found, or when you have nowhere else to go. My client, an anonymous source using encrypted channels, had been brief. Julian Thorne is in danger. His family is cleaning house. Get him out before the clock strikes midnight. I didn't care about Thorne politics. I didn't care that Julian had been the face of every young elite magazine before his father disowned him for refusing to lie under oath. All I cared about was the breach. I reached the 4th floor, my boots silent on the warped linoleum. I didn't knock. I felt the air pressure change. A door at the end of the hall had just closed. I wasn't alone. I drew my sidearm, the cold weight of the steel a familiar comfort. I kicked the door of 4B inward. The apartment was small, cramped, and smelled of cheap coffee and old paper. And there, standing behind a laminate kitchen island, was Julian. He looked nothing like the photos. The designer suits were gone, replaced by a threadbare hoodie and jeans. He was thinner, his cheekbones sharp, his eyes wide and panicked. He was holding a dull kitchen knife with both hands, his knuckles white and shaking. "Stay back," he shouted, his voice cracking. "I told them I won't sign. I won't go back." "I'm not here for your signature, Julian," I said, my voice low, the Enceladus grit cutting through the silence. I lowered my weapon, but didn't holster it. "I'm here because your father's security team is currently 3 floors down, and they aren't coming to take you home for dinner." Julian froze. The knife dipped slightly. "Who sent you?" "Someone who wants you to keep breathing. Now drop the toy, grab your bag, and move. We have exactly 90 seconds before this hallway becomes a kill zone." He didn't move. He stared at me, searching for something in my face. I realized then that Julian hadn't looked at a person with trust in a long time. When you're abandoned by the people who gave you life, the rest of the world just looks like a threat. "Why should I trust you?" he whispered. "Because I'm the only one in this building not getting paid to kill you," I growled. I stepped forward, closing the distance until I was looming over him. I gently but firmly took the knife from his shaking hand. "Look at me, Julian. I'm your silent shield. As long as you stay behind me, you live. Understand?" For the first time, the panic in his eyes softened into something else. Relief. A single tear escaped, tracking through the dust on his cheek. He nodded. We didn't make it to the stairs. The sound of the service elevator dinking open echoed through the thin walls. 2 men in tactical gear stepped into the hall. They weren't police. They were mercenaries. The Thorne family's private fixers. I shoved Julian into the bathroom. "Lock the door. Don't come out until I say my name." "Malakai," he started, his voice small. "Lock it, Julian." The first mercenary kicked the door. I didn't give him a chance to adjust to the light. I moved like a shadow, a blur of practiced violence. It was over in seconds. A disarm, a heavy strike to the throat, and a shoulder throw that sent the second man through the drywall. I wasn't a hero. I was a professional. But as I stood over the unconscious men, I felt a strange, hot pulse of anger. This was a kid, a son, and they had sent professionals to erase him like a typo in a legal brief. I walked to the bathroom door and knocked twice. "Julian, it's Malakai. We're moving." The door opened immediately. Julian looked at the chaos in his living room, then up at me. He didn't look disgusted. He looked at me like a miracle. He reached out, his fingers brushing the tactical vest over my chest, as if making sure I was real. "You stayed," he whispered. "I'm paid to stay," I replied. But for the first time in a decade, the lie felt heavy in my mouth. I grabbed his arm, pulling him close to my side as we headed for the fire escape. The cold rain hit us as we climbed down into the alleyway. I kept my body between him and the street, a constant protective alpha presence. As we reached my SUV and I threw him into the passenger seat, I looked back at the apartment building. The Thorne family thought they had disposed of a problem. They didn't realize they had just given me a purpose. I climbed in and looked at Julian. He was shivering, his arms wrapped around himself. "Where are we going?" he asked. "Somewhere they can't find you," I said, putting the car in gear. "Somewhere you can start over. From now on, your old life is dead. You're with me now." Julian looked at the city lights blurring past the window, then back at me. A small, sad smile touched his lips. "I think my old life died the day they disowned me, Malakai. I've just been waiting for someone to notice." I noticed, and I meant it. The cabin was deep in the Catskills, surrounded by ancient pines that sighed in the wind like they were keeping secrets. There was no Wi-Fi, no cell service, and only one way in or out. It was a fortress of cedar and stone. I pulled the SUV into the hidden garage and cut the engine. The silence was immediate and heavy. Julian didn't move. He was still staring out the window at the dark trees. "Is this where you kill me?" he asked, his voice so thin it barely reached my ears. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. "If I wanted to kill you, Julian, I wouldn't have wasted the gas to drive you 3 hours north. I told you, you're under my protection." He finally looked at me, and his eyes were hollow. My father used to say the same thing, right before he told me that if I didn't lie for him, I was no longer his son. Protection has a price in my family, Malakai. What's yours? "Dinner," I said, unbuckling my seatbelt. "I'm hungry, and you look like you haven't eaten a real meal since the day you were disowned. Move." Inside, the cabin was cold. I went straight to the hearth and started a fire. Julian stood in the center of the room, looking small and out of place in his dirty hoodie. He looked like a prince who had stumbled into a charcoal drawing. "There's a first aid kit in the kitchen," I said, pointing over my shoulder. "You're bleeding." He looked down at his arm. I'd noticed a graze during the fight, likely from a shattered glass frame or a stray blade. He hadn't even felt it. He walked to the kitchen with the gait of a ghost. A few minutes later, I heard the sound of a plastic bin falling. I walked into the kitchen to find him sitting on the floor, the first aid kit spilled around him, his head between his knees. He was shaking, not with fear, but with the delayed shock of everything he had lost. "I have nothing," he whispered, the words muffled by his knees. "They took the apartment. They took my credit cards. They even took my dog, Malakai. They told the shelter he was dangerous, just so I couldn't keep him. They want me to be a ghost." I knelt in front of him, my large frame casting a shadow over his trembling form. I didn't say anything. I just reached out, grabbed his wrist, and pulled his arm toward me. I began to clean the wound on his forearm with an antiseptic wipe. "They can take your money, Julian. They can take your house, but they can't take the fact that you survived," I said, my voice low and grounding. I looked up, catching his tear-streaked gaze. "The world is full of people who were abandoned by the ones who were supposed to love them. We're a bigger club than you think." "You too?" he asked, his voice a breathy whisper. My old man didn't like that I wanted to enlist instead of taking over his construction business. He told me if I left, the door would be locked when I came back. I was 18. I never went back. Julian reached out with his free hand, his fingers hesitating before resting on the tactical strap of my vest. "I'm sorry." "Don't be," I said, wrapping a clean bandage around his arm. "It made me the man who can keep you alive tonight. Now, get some sleep. I'll be on the porch." The night was freezing, but I didn't feel it. I sat on the porch with a thermal scope, watching the tree line. My mind was supposed to be on the perimeter, but all I could think about was the way Julian had looked at me, like I was the first solid ground he'd touched in months. Around 3 a.m., the screen door creaked. Julian stepped out, wrapped in a heavy wool blanket I'd left on the sofa. He looked pale in the moonlight. He sat on the porch swing a few feet away from me. "I couldn't sleep," he said. "The silence is too loud." "That's the sound of safety," I replied, not looking away from the woods. "You'll get used to it." "Malakai?" "Yeah?" "Why did you stay? You said you were paid to stay, but I saw your face when you fought those men. You were angry. You didn't look like a man just doing a job." I lowered the scope and finally looked at him. The firelight from inside the cabin caught the side of his face, making him look like a masterpiece. He wasn't just an asset anymore. He was a person, a brave, stubborn person who had stood up to an empire. "I don't like bullies, Julian, and I don't like it when people treat their family like garbage," I said. I stood up and walked over to him, standing so close I could feel the heat radiating from the blanket. "You were abandoned by people who didn't deserve you. That makes me my responsibility, not because of a paycheck, but because I said I'd be your shield, and I don't break my word." Julian stood up, the blanket slipping slightly. He stepped into my space, his chest almost touching mine. He was so much smaller than me, but in that moment, he felt like the center of the universe. "Thank you," he whispered. He leaned in, his forehead resting against my collarbone for just a second. It wasn't a sexual gesture. It was a plea for connection. I hesitated, my hands hovering over his shoulders, before I finally let one hand rest on the back of his neck, my thumb stroking the soft hair there. "Go back inside, Julian," I said, my voice thick. "I've got the watch." He nodded, pulled his blanket tighter, and retreated into the cabin. As the door clicked shut, I realized I was in trouble. I was a protective alpha male who had spent years building walls around my heart, and Julian Thorne had just walked right through the front door. The birds in the Catskills usually sing at 5 a.m. This morning, they were dead silent. That was my first warning. I was already awake, sitting on the porch with a mug of black coffee and my sidearm on the table. Through the thermal scope, I saw the heat signatures, 4 of them, moving through the tree line. They were professional, moving in a diamond formation, but they weren't used to the woods. They were city hitters, and they were loud. "Julian," I said, not raising my voice, "get in the cellar, now." He appeared in the doorway, his hair messy from sleep, wearing one of my oversized flannels. "They're here, aren't they?" "They're here," I said, standing up. I checked my magazine and chambered around. The sound, a sharp metallic clack, usually made civilians flinch. Julian just nodded, his jaw set. He was evolving. "The cellar has a reinforced door. Go." "Malakai," he whispered, stepping onto the porch. He reached out, his hand trembling as it rested on my forearm. Don't die for me. I'm not worth it." I looked him dead in the eye, my voice dropping into that low, dangerous rumble. "You were abandoned by people who didn't know your value, Julian. I do. Now get in the cellar." I didn't wait for them to reach the house. I met them in the clearing. The lead man was someone I recognized, Vance, a former merc who'd gone corporate. He stopped 10 yards away, his hands held out to show he wasn't drawing his weapon. "Malakai," Vance shouted. "We don't want a body count. The senator just wants his property back. We have a wire transfer waiting for you. 5 million. Just walk away and go back to the city. Forget you ever saw the Thorne kid." I felt a cold, dark laughter bubbling up in my chest. 5 million? That's what a son is worth to a Thorne these days? He's a liability, Malakai. He's going to talk. We can't have that. "He's a human being," I growled, stepping forward, "and he's under my protection. Tell the senator that his money is no good here, and tell him that if he wants his son, he's gonna have to go through me, and I'm feeling very expensive today." Vance's face darkened. "Kill him." The woods exploded into noise. I dove behind a fallen oak, returning fire with a precision they weren't expecting. I wasn't just a bodyguard anymore. I was a man defending his home. One by one, I picked them off, using the terrain they didn't understand. I was a shadow in the pines, a ghost with a grudge. When the last man fell, the silence returned, heavier than before. I walked back to the cabin, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I wasn't hurt, but the adrenaline was a poison in my veins. I kicked open the cellar door. "Julian, it's clear!" He came running out, practically flying up the stairs. He didn't check for blood. He just threw himself into my arms, his face burying into the crook of my neck. He was sobbing, a raw, primal sound of relief. I heard the shots, and I thought I lost you," he gasped. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him so tight he could probably feel my heartbeat through my vest. I didn't care about the mission. I didn't care about the paycheck. "You're never going to lose me," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm not leaving you, Julian. Not today. Not ever." I pulled back just enough to look at him. His face was wet with tears, but his eyes were bright. He looked at me with love so pure it terrified me. "They'll keep coming," Julian whispered. "My father, he won't stop." "Then we won't stop either," I said. I reached out, my hand cupping his jaw, my thumb wiping away a tear. "We're going to take him down. We're going to tell the truth. And then we're going to disappear. Together." Julian leaned into my touch, his eyes closing. "You'd do that for me? After everything?" "I'd do anything for you, Julian. You were disowned by a king, but you were claimed by a warrior, and a warrior doesn't let go of what's his." I leaned down, and this time there was no hesitation. I kissed him, a deep, protective, and world-shattering kiss that tasted like survival and a new beginning. He kissed me back with everything he had, his hands tangling in my hair, anchoring us both to the earth. The Thorne family had abandoned Julian, thinking he would wither away and die. They didn't realize that in the shadows they had sent him exactly what he needed, a shield that would never break, and a man who would love him for exactly who he was.
Julian spent his whole life being told that his value was tied to a seat at a table he never wanted to sit at. He was abandoned by the very people who should have carried him, all because he chose his conscience over their corruption. But in the silence of that cabin, he found something no bank account could ever buy, a man who saw him when he felt invisible. Malakai didn't just save Julian's life, he gave him a reason to live it. Because sometimes the family you're born into is just a shadow, and the person who catches you when you fall is the only true home you'll ever know. If you believe that everyone deserves a shield when the world turns its back, then subscribe to Gay Stories Chronicles and join our family. We don't just tell stories, we celebrate the strength it takes to be yourself. Give this video a like if you would have stayed in that cabin with Malakai. Before we go, I have a question for you. If you were Julian, would you have the courage to testify against your own family to do what's right? Or would you take Malakai's offer to disappear forever and start over in secret? Leave your answer in the comments below. I'll be down there reading every single one. I'm Malakai, and this has been a Gay Stories Chronicles original. Stay safe and stay strong.